Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Welcome to my super long video. So you're probably wondering why I'm making a super long video in the year 2024 when everyone else is making TikTok videos and Facebook Reels and YouTube Shorts and 1-minute videos and stuff like that. Well, it's really all just kind of in response to this one comment. I'm not at all mad about this comment. It's just that this person said, hey, sometimes you say this stuff is simple, so if it's so simple, why do you have so many videos? And I said, well, it's because I'm a content creator. The overarching message is pretty simple. It's something I can wrap up into one single video. That's this video right here. So what is this message that I'm trying to get across in almost every single one of my videos? That is basically, it all started out when I was a young kid and I first started playing guitar, and I would watch other guitar players pick up a guitar and they would just start playing stuff. And I would say, wow, that was cool. What was that? Was that a Beatles song or something? And they would say, no, I was just, just playing around. I was just messing around. And I said, wow, that was cool. How did you do that? How did you just start playing stuff? No one could just give me a clearly defined answer. So from that point all the way up until this morning when I woke up, I've been trying to figure this stuff out. And the reason I say up until this morning is because you never stop learning. I'm never going to stop learning. There's no end to this. I'm 30 years into my own personal guitar learning journey. So this is what I know so far. But that's really what it was all about. I just wanted to be able to pick up my guitar and just play stuff. So as an example of what I mean, let's say we just start noodling around with some open cowboy chords that you learn like in your first week of playing guitar. You start to learn what chords sound good together. You might play something like... and then it may go to, I don't know, and then it may go to, back to, and then you might throw an A minor, then a C major, back to an E. So you have that handful of chords, you can start noodling around, just play those chords. All right, so right now we have something to work with. We have a little handful of cowboy chords. So then you kind of want to take that information and you want to use the rest of the fretboard. So let's start to do that. So we're just going to take those chords that we just played, but we're going to play them as bar chords. Alright, so I did right there was I just took the chords that we started out with, the open cowboy chords, a lot of people refer to them as. I took these open position chords that were played right here, and then I just converted them into movable bar chords. So the thing about guitar is that everything is movable, every single concept, every single scale, every single chord shape. So now beyond just playing basic major and minor bar chords, I'm now going to play these chords in a slightly more colored variation. This is going to be known as the 7th form of these chords. I'm going to explain all to you about what major chords are, what minor chords are, and what the 7th form of chords are coming up in this video. This is just what it sounds like when I take the basic major and minor chords and play them in their slightly more colorful 7th form. So I wasn't really doing anything crazy there. I just took these basic major and minor movable bar chord shapes, all of which had their root on the A string, just to keep everything in kind of a linear fashion, and I just played them in their 7th form. The 7th form is just one additional note added to each of the chords. Alright, so then the next thing that I might want to do is to add fills between each chord. So how do I do that? The way that I do that is to look at the chord progression that I just played as a whole and ask myself, what key am I playing in? What key is this chord progression putting me in? The answer to that question gives me the information that I need to add all of the fills that I could possibly want. I'll explain all about keys in this video, but just right now, we're in E minor. All right, that's the key. Why are we in E minor? That will be explained in this video. but we're in the key of E minor. This chord progression that we played puts us in the key of E minor. Therefore, the scale that I use, you only need one scale. If all of the chords are in the same key as each other, there's only one scale that you need to worry about. You don't need to play one scale for each chord. That's a big misconception. It's just one single scale for all of the chords. So the one single scale that I use, that I'm going to use for all of my fills, is going to be the E minor scale, because we're in the key of E minor. So if I map out the E minor scale across the entire neck of the guitar, which is just 7 notes, all of this is going to be explained in this video, don't worry. But if I just map out the notes of the E minor scale, I just map out those 7 notes, those are the notes that light up to me. All right, those are going to be the notes that I use for all of my fills. So we have our first chord. We then move to this chord. We go to this chord. Can add a couple out of key notes to make it sound a little bluesier. All right, so I knew how to blues up my playing by adding some out of key stuff. But in order to add out of key stuff, I needed to know which notes were in key. Therefore, I could add the out of key stuff in between the in key stuff. A little bit of theory. Don't need a lot. Don't worry. All right, so then we move up to the A minor chord, which was up here, which we played up here. And then we had a C chord down here. And then back to the E chord. I'm just playing around with these same basic chords. I'm just like, okay, I'm on the E minor chord now. That's the chord I play. And then I'm like, okay, I'm on the G major chord. Okay, that's the chord. Okay, then I'm on the D chord. Okay, so I'm aware of what chords I'm playing, but then the scale that I'm playing around it, it's just the E minor scale the whole time. And then if I want to make it sound bluesy or jazzy or whatever, however you want to describe it, then I just throw in out of key notes in between the E minor scale notes. So that's really all this stuff is. The rest of this video is me just explaining the simple model. Let's get into it. So first things first, I want you to be absolutely clear about what it is that I'm teaching. 90% roughly of all of my YouTube videos and every single thing on the Zombie Guitar website that is considered fundamental is all diatonic music theory. This is the fundamental stuff. This is the stuff that all musicians should know. This is the stuff that will allow musicians to communicate between each other. This is not super detailed stuff. This is just basic music theory. If I could give an analogy to math, this is the arithmetic of the music theory world, or this is how arithmetic is in math. So like all people, all adults pretty much use arithmetic. But then beyond arithmetic, you don't really use calculus too much. But most adults would agree that arithmetic is pretty important to know. You need to know how to add and subtract and divide and multiply. Well, as a musician, just understanding this basic diatonic music theory, which is equivalent to arithmetic in math, this is the basic stuff. This is the prerequisite to jazz. Jazz is like the calculus of the music theory world. If you are wanting to go into jazz, you better know your diatonic music theory, and you better know it well. You need to know that stuff super, super well in order to be able to take on jazz. The next thing to understand is that if you are a guitar player, which you probably are if you're watching my videos, there is general music theory, which is the music theory that applies to everything. It applies to piano and saxophone and vocals and oboe and guitar and everything. It's just all instruments. It's general music theory. And then there's guitar theory. That's stuff like the caged system, the 5 pentatonic positions, the 7 3-note per string patterns. That is shape-based theory that is specific to the guitar fretboard. So we first need to make that differentiation. Are we learning general music theory, or are we learning guitar-specific theory, guitar theory? I'm first going to start this out by explaining just the general music theory as it pertains to this diatonic music theory, the arithmetic of music. So I don't need my guitar for this because it applies to all instruments, so let me just put this down for now. All right, so if I could sum up diatonic music theory into just one simple phrase, it would be 12 keys. 12 keys. Now, Some people are going to say that there's 12 keys. Some people are going to say that there's 24 keys or 30 keys. And just like everything else on the internet, there's going to be fights and there's going to be people calling each other names and all kinds of stuff. It's a ridiculous argument. So the people that are on the 24 or 30 keys side of the argument, most of them will agree that there is a difference between a key and a key signature. Most of the people that think in terms of 24 or 30 keys will say, oh yeah, well there's only 12 key signatures, or potentially even 15 if you kind of want to be a music theory nerd about it. They will say, yeah, there's only that many key signatures, but then there's 24 or 30 keys, so there's this many keys, but there's this many key signatures. Keys are different than key signatures. So under the 12 key model, the model that I teach, the overarching understanding of all this, basically it's just that key and key signature are the same thing. That's really the only difference. We can all be friends if you want to think in terms of 24 keys or 12 keys. It doesn't make a difference. It's just when I use the term key, I'm also referring to key signature. Key signature, same thing. For simplicity's sake, there's 12 of them. So since we have 12 notes in our Western music system, you can start on any one of those 12 notes and then play the major scale. By playing the major scale starting on any one of the potential 12 starting points, it'll give you a unique set of 7 notes, and those are the notes that make up the key signature, or the key, whatever you want to call it. So most people that grew up listening to Western style music, which is the music system that was derived by the 12 notes, all right, we're using a 12 note system here. So if you grew up under the music that uses 12 notes, most people have the ability to just start from any random note and then sing the major scale starting from that point. Like, their singing may not be perfect, it may be pitchy, but at least they'll be able to hear in their head what the major scale should sound like. That's just because we've all been accustomed to hearing the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale, right? What that also tells you is that all 12 keys work exactly the same way. Because we can hear do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do from any starting point, and we can recognize, hey, that's the major scale. Because the major scale always sounds like the major scale, regardless of whether it's the C major scale or the D major scale or the F major scale or the E major scale, we always know it's the major scale. That's because the relationship between the notes, which if you want to put a fancy term on it, it's called the intervallic relationship between adjacent notes. Ooh, fancy words there. But that's what it is. The intervallic relationship between the notes is always going to be the same. So it doesn't matter which key you're playing in, which of the 12 keys you're playing in. You started on one of the 12 notes, you played the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale. Now you have your 7 notes. Those are the notes that make up the key. All right, so let's say that I want to play some music in the key of G major. What are my notes of the key of G major? Well, I start on the note G, and I just play the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale. I could do this on the piano, and I might have to fudge around with combinations of white and black keys until I finally get it right. I'm like, okay, there's G, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. All right, got it. And then I just look at those notes and I'm like, okay, those are my 7 notes that make up the key that I'm playing in. That's how I arrive at this pool of 7 notes. So now that I know that information, now we can derive our chords. So each of the 12 keys has 7 chords in it. Each of the 7 chords has a root note that is one of the 7 notes of the key that you're playing in. So in order to determine the 7 3-note chords, also known as triads, that are found in the key of G major, what you do is you write out the G major scale, and then you start on any one of the 7 notes, and then you just play every other note until you have 3, and then do that starting on each of the 7 potential starting points within this scale that we're playing in, this key that we're playing in, the key of G major, and then you get your triads. So starting on G, skipping a note, you get G, B, skip a note, you have D. Then the next one is A, so start on A, skip a note, you have A, C, E. Do that for each of the 7 potential starting points. That's how you get your triads. If you do the exact same thing, but you do it for 4 notes instead of 3 notes, you get your chords in 7th form. That's why I said when I started out playing just the major and minor chords, it sounded nice because everything was in key together. But then when I played the chords in their 7th form, it added extra color to it. It added extra prettiness to it because it had one additional tone added to it. So triads are 3 notes, 7th chords, 4 notes. So why is this information important? Well, it's because these are all the chords that go together. All of these chords, you can play them together in any order that you want, and the chords are just going to work together because it's all part of a key. And then when I want to add fills, I know the notes to use for my fills. I just use the notes of the key that I'm playing in. The whole thing that I played in the demo in the beginning was actually in this key. You might not have been aware that it was in this key, but it was. I was actually playing in what is known as the relative minor perspective of this key. So every major key, remember there's 12 major keys. Each of the 12 major keys has a relative minor key, and vice versa. Each of the 12 minor keys has a relative major key. What that means is that all of the same stuff is contained in the relative major-minor pair. So the relative minor of this key that we're playing in right now, which is the key of G major, is the key of E minor. You can always determine what your relative major root is going to be because it's the 6th note of the major scale for the key that you're playing in. So we're in the key of G major. The 6th note of the major scale is the note E. That lets us know, okay, the relative minor of the key of G major is the key of E minor. So the E minor scale, the E natural minor scale it's called, is the same 7 notes as the G major scale. It's just that you start on the note E. All right, it's the same 7 notes as we just had. You see that F sharp in there. Remember, we have all natural notes, but we have that F sharp in there. That's the unique set of 7 notes for this key that we're playing in. We're now just looking at it from the minor perspective. You can do the exact same thing as you did before. Start on any one of the 7 notes and take every other note until you have 3. Do that starting on each of the 7 potential starting points, and that's how you have your triads. You do the same thing, but you get 4 notes, and then that's how you determine your 7th chords. You can compare the 7 chords in the key of G major to the 7 chords in the key of E minor, and you're going to see they're the exact same thing. That's how a relative major-minor pair works. So that demo that I played in the beginning, was I playing in the key of E minor? Yes. Was I playing in the key of G major? Yes. Which one was it? It was probably E minor because I started and ended on the E minor, but there was also a G major chord being used in that progression. So had I ended the whole thing on a G major chord, the listener would have been like, oh, that was in G major. If I ended it on an E minor chord, the listener would have been like, oh, that was an E minor. It's really just, it's up to you. What was it in? It's the same key. It was one of the 12 possible keys. So do I need to stick 100% to just the stuff that's found in a key? Like, do I have to just stick to these 7 notes at all times? Do I have to just stick to these 7 chords at all time if I want to play in the key of G major? No, absolutely not. But in order to break the rules, you need to understand the rules. And that's what this is all about. So there's so much cool stuff that you can do. You can throw in out-of-key chords, you can throw in out-of-key notes, you can do all kinds of stuff. But if you're playing with a bunch of musicians in a band, and the rest of the band is fully aware, we're in the key of G major here, the rest of the band is fully aware, in the key of G major, we have these 7 chords, we have these 7 notes, that's the in-key stuff, everyone else is on that page. You want to be a competent musician, you also want to know that stuff. That way, when out-of-key stuff happens, when the band wants to throw in an out-of-key chord here and there, you just know instantly. You're like, oh, there's an out-of-key chord. I got that. Cool. I can treat that chord differently. I can do something a little bit different in my improvisation. I am on the same page as the rest of these musicians. So that's why you want to have a full, complete understanding of this arithmetic. A chord is considered out of key if it contains one single note that is found that is outside of the key. That's all it takes. So if you ask yourself, is a D minor chord in key or out of key for the key of G major or for the key of E minor? Is a D minor chord in key or out of key? When you look at the notes of a D minor chord, which is D, F, and A, you look at the notes of the G major scale or the E natural minor scale, and you say, oh, well, there's no F in there, so a D minor chord is not in the key. Does that mean that you can't use a D minor chord in your playing when you're playing in the key of G major or the key of E minor? Absolutely not. You can throw a D minor chord in there all you want, but it's an out-of-key chord. That out-of-key chord is going to be used to spice up the music that you're already playing. The rest of the band knows that you're in the key of G major or you're in the key of E minor. The rest of the band knows that when that D minor chord comes along, that's an outside chord, that outside chord needs to be treated a little bit special because it's outside of the key. Everyone else knows that stuff. You need to know that stuff too. That is the basics. Now, when it comes to general music theory, that's it. That's what I consider to be the fundamentals. Anything beyond that point, icing on the cake, you know? Now we can just take all this stuff and apply it to the guitar. But the cool thing about the guitar is that we can bypass a lot of music theory. We don't even need to learn the notes of the fretboard because we have guitar theory. Guitar theory is a big cheat. It's not a bad thing. It's just we have this ability to be able to cheat. Why not use it, you know? General theory is great. And we're going to take this general music theory and we're going to apply it to the guitar, but it's going to be a different perspective. We're going to look at it as shapes and patterns. We're going to look at it as we don't even need to know all the notes of the fretboard. We just need to know the notes on a few strings, and then we can apply guitar systems. The 3 systems we're going to talk about are going to be the 5 pentatonic positions, the 7 3-note per string patterns, and the caged system. Those are guitar-specific systems, and they allow us to cheat and not actually learn the full scope of general music theory. If you don't want to, you can if you want, and I highly encourage that you do. But if you want to just cheat and, get to the point where you're playing on stage and you're just jamming out and you're shredding and stuff and you don't even want to learn all that boring music theory stuff, that's what the guitar theory systems are for. So like if you know the patterns for the key of, say, G major, E minor, which is the key that we've been talking about so far, if you know the patterns and you know how they connect together, and you can apply the 5 pentatonic positions and the 7 3-note per string patterns and the cage system to the key of G major or the key of E minor, which is the same key under the 12 key model. If you can apply those 3 guitar systems to that one key, you can apply it to all 12 keys because the shapes and patterns are exactly the same for all 12 keys. That is why the guitar is just one gigantic cheat code to music. And that's why we love it. That's why it's awesome. That's why I love it. So you only have to learn a guitar system one time for one single key. And then if you do that for one single key, you can then play in all 12 keys. That way you can then go and jam with the band, and the band can say, oh, we're in the key of B flat major. And you can be like, oh, we're in the key of B flat major? No problem. And you know your shapes and patterns for the key of B flat major. Or they can be like, oh, we're in the key of F minor. And you can be like, okay, F minor, no problem. And you know the shapes and patterns for the key of F minor because the shapes and patterns are exactly the same for all 12 keys. All right, so the first guitar system that we're going to talk about are the 5 pentatonic positions. So in order to apply the 5 pentatonic positions and allow you to play up and down the entire fretboard in the key that you are attempting to play in, you're going to need to know your notes on the low E string, and it would help to know them on the A string as well. You don't need to know your notes on any of the other strings. Of course, the more you know, the better, but you're going to at least want to know the notes on the low E string. All right? Once you know the notes on the low E string, you can find your pentatonic position number 1 by taking your index finger and placing it on the minor root on the low E string, or by taking your pinky finger and placing it on the major root on the low E string. So the key that we've been using for the example for this whole lesson is the key of G major, which is the same key signature as E minor. So E minor, G major. Pinky goes on major root, index goes on minor root. So anywhere I can find an E on the low E string, I would put my index finger on, and that would allow me to locate my pentatonic position number 1. Or anywhere there's a G on the low E string, I can put my pinky on that, and that will allow me to find my pentatonic position number 1 as well. So there's an E all the way down here, but it's an open E string. There's also an E up here, 12th fret of the low E string, so I'm going to put my index finger there. And that's how I locate my pentatonic position number 1. I could have done the same thing by taking my pinky and putting that on the major scale root, which is the note G, and there's my pentatonic position number 1. So this is your E minor pentatonic position number 1. This is also your G major pentatonic position 1. So you found the shape for pentatonic position number 1 for this key. That shape is going to remain constant regardless of what key you're playing in. It doesn't make a difference. So let's say that I want to play in, say, the key of D major, which has the relative minor of B minor. And here's a quick time to just reference the circle of fifths, which you can always use as an additional cheat sheet. Like if you don't want to remember that D major and B minor are a relative major minor pair, the outer circle and inner circle that go together are always going to be the major minor pair. So that's just like a quick little tip right here. So let's say we're playing in the key of D major, which has the relative minor B minor. How do we locate our pentatonic position number 1? You can do it the exact same way. B minor, put that on the note B on the low E string, or D major, put that on the note D on the low E string. So here's a B right there, 7th fret. Here's a D right there, 10th fret. All right, so there's my pentatonic position number 1 for that key. There's also a B all the way up here, and then there's a D up here, so B, D, so there's pentatonic position number 1 up there again. So that's home base. You can then build out from there to cover the rest of the fretboard. And how do you do that? Well, you do that with pentatonic position 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's why you have 5 pentatonic positions. It's 5 shapes that you have to remember. Those 5 shapes are going to be exactly the same for all 12 keys. Those 5 shapes are going to be the same for major keys. Those 5 shapes are going to be the same for minor keys. It's just that if you're playing in a major key, you want to be aware of where the root note is, the major root note. So if I'm playing in the key of, say, G major, I want to be aware of where G is at all points on the fretboard. If I'm playing in the key of E minor, the shapes are still going to be the same. The 5 pentatonic positions are all going to have the same shapes that connect together like puzzle pieces, but I'm just going to want to be aware of where the E is at all points on the fretboard. Once you know where your pentatonic position number 1 is, pentatonic position number 2 is going to be right in this direction, right in that direction towards the bridge. It's going to be different if you're a right-handed guitar player or a left-handed guitar player, but towards the bridge of the guitar is where pentatonic position number 2 is going to go. So we're in the key of G major, E minor. Here's our pentatonic position number 1. Here's our pentatonic position number 2. It has this shape. Here's our pentatonic position number 3. It has this shape. Pentatonic position number 4 has this shape. Pentatonic position number 1, it always goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 would be in this direction, in the direction of the headstock. So here's 1, here's 5, here's 4, here's 3, here's 2, and then here's 1 again. So pinky could go on the major root, which is G. Index, it's not going on anything because it's just an open E string now, but there's your pentatonic position number 1 for this key right here. So that's your entire pentatonic scale for the key of G major, E minor. So why am I talking about pentatonic scale? What's up with that? I was talking about major scales and natural minor scales before. Why this pentatonic stuff? Well, it's just because that's just your framework. That's where guitar players start out. And the reason we start out there, and the reason piano players start out with the major scale, is because guitar players, we have this simple little box pattern to remember. Guitar players love patterns. They love not knowing notes. They love just memorizing box patterns, and there's no easier box pattern than pentatonic position number 1. So yeah, that's why guitar players start out with the pentatonic scale. But just understand that the pentatonic scale is just 5 of the 7 total notes for the key that we're playing in. So the E minor pentatonic scale is 5 notes. It's just 5 of the 7 total notes of the E natural minor scale. The E minor pentatonic scale has the same 5 notes as the G major pentatonic scale because it's a relative major minor pair. So the G major pentatonic scale has just 5 notes, but that's just 5 of the 7 total notes of the G major scale. So now it's just a matter of saying, okay, so where do those 2 extra notes fit in to each of these 5 box patterns that I have to remember? If I can do this for one single key and I can just remember these 5 box patterns, and then I can just remember where there's 2 extra notes there's the 2 non-pentatonic notes, the 2 extra diatonic notes, the 2 notes that are completing the full 7-note key scale notes. If I can just memorize my 5 pentatonic positions and then just memorize where those 2 additional notes fall into each of the 5 pentatonic position boxes, and I can just do that for one key, I can then play in all 12 keys, because it's just a matter of locating your pentatonic box number 1 based on what key you're in, expanding from there with pentatonic position 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, it doesn't matter. Find your pentatonic position number 1, find your 5 boxes, fill in the 2 notes. That's that's the 5 pentatonic positions in a nutshell. So let's just go and fill out the rest of the fretboard for each of the 5 pentatonic positions for the key that we're playing in, and then I'll leave it up to you to do it for whatever key you want. So whenever you're playing in this pentatonic position, which is pentatonic position number 1 for the key of E minor or G major, you add in your extra 2 notes like this. It just adds some more melodic possibilities for your playing. You know, if you just stick to pentatonic, you know, just it has a specific sound to it, but then you add in the extra melodic notes. You know, you have all this cool stuff that you can do. It's just more notes to play with. It's all 7 notes to play with, as opposed to just the 5 pentatonic. It's good to know your 5 pentatonic notes, and then it's good to know which 2 notes are the non-pentatonic notes but are still the in-key notes. That's why on this diagram you see that the pentatonic notes are yellow and then the remaining notes are in black. All right, it's good to know which are which. So that's your pentatonic position number 1. You then have your pentatonic position number 2 right here, which is like this. All right, so we can go ahead and we can add in our notes like this. Part of it too. All right, so that's your pentatonic position number 2. It's just the same handful of notes, 5 of which are pentatonic, 2 of which are part of the key but not part of the pentatonic. We're just a little bit further up the fretboard and it forms a different pattern. This pentatonic position number 1 connection with pentatonic position number 2, as far as shapes go, it's going to be the same regardless of what key you're playing in. So memorize these shapes once. Memorize where the 2 non-pentatonic notes fit into each of the shapes once. You can then do it for all 12 keys. Let's expand a little more up to pentatonic position number 3. So here's that. You then move up to pentatonic position number 4. Now here's an important thing. I refer to this as the A string home box. I refer to pentatonic position number 1 as the home box, and then pentatonic position number 4 as the A string home box. Reason being is because it's another reference point on the fretboard that you can use. Pentatonic position number 1 is a great reference point, especially if you're playing in a key that you're not super comfortable playing in. You can always find your pentatonic position number 1 based on the minor and major scale root locations on the low E string. Pentatonic position number 4 works the same way. It's just that the major and minor scale root locations are now going to be found in the A string. So we're playing in the key of G major, we're playing in the key of E minor here. It's still going to be minor, major. So index is going to go on the note E, but on the A string this time, and then pinky is going to go on the note G, but on the A string. That's why I call this the A string home box. This is just pentatonic position number 4, that's it. So we're up here at our pentatonic position number 4, and here's the note E, here's the note G. So when I'm up this high on the fretboard, I kind of don't use my pinky as much, I kind of just use my 3rd finger, but just for the purpose of locating where this box resides at, I could easily find my pentatonic position number 4 just by knowing the notes on my A string. Now, I'm not going to go any further because not everyone has a 24 fret guitar, so not everyone's going to be able to get to pentatonic position number 5 for the key of G major or E minor in this direction. So we can just fill in the rest of the fretboard in this way. So here's our pentatonic position number 1, which is always going to have pentatonic position number 5 right next to it in this direction. So you can go ahead and you can fill in your remaining diatonic notes there. And then pentatonic 4 is going to be in this direction. So again, this is what I call the A string home box. Why is this called the A string home box? Well, underneath my index finger is where that E is, that's the minor scale root. And then underneath my pinky is where the major scale root is, which is the note G. So here's how I find my pentatonic position number 4 box. Pentatonic position number 3 with the remaining diatonic notes, pentatonic position number 2, and pentatonic position number 1. So we just fill out the whole fretboard for the key of G major or the key of E minor. We memorized 5 boxes, 5 shapes. Those 5 shapes are guitar-specific shapes. Within each of those 5 boxes, we then memorized where each of the 2 missing notes goes. All we needed to know in order to do that was what was the major scale root of the key and what was the minor scale root of the key. Once we know what the major and minor scale root of the key are, we can then locate our pentatonic position number 1. Once we have our pentatonic position number 1, we have our 2, 3, 4, and 5, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We can expand the fretboard out. The shapes are going to be exactly the same for all 12 keys. So that is the 5 pentatonic positions approach to mapping out the entire fretboard for any key. Let's now look at the 7 3-note per string approach. All right, so in the 5 pentatonic approach, we looked at how to map out the pentatonic scale across the fretboard, and then adding in those 2 missing notes to complete the full 7-note diatonic scale, the full 7-note key scale. So that was a 5-position guitar visualization system. There was 5 specific positions to remember, 5 specific box patterns to remember. This system is 7 patterns to remember. Each of these 7 patterns has 3 notes per string. This is just the diatonic scale now. If there's still overlap, you're still doing the same thing. The fundamentals still apply. You're still mapping out the notes of the G major scale or whatever key you're playing, and it's the same shapes for all keys. We're just using the G major scale for our example here, or the E minor scale, because the patterns are the same for G major and E minor. You're just mapping out the 7 notes of the key scale that you're playing in. It's just that we're only focusing on the 7-note scale now. We're not focusing on the pentatonic part of it, So even though we're not calling this the 5 pentatonic positions approach, that doesn't mean that you can't at any point just switch to pentatonic playing if you want. You can, at any point in time in your playing, you can be like, oh, full G major scale, use all 7 notes, or oh, just 5 pentatonic notes for the key of G major. You can make that switch at any point. It does not matter. It's just that the 7 3-note per string method of visualizing the fretboard only focuses on the 7-note diatonic scale. So the way that you identify these 7 patterns is you just say, what is the major root of the key that I'm playing in? All right, so I'm in the key of G major here. So the major root is the note G. So I'm going to take my index finger and I'm going to put that on the note G on the low E string. Here's what your pattern number 1 looks like. So pattern number 2 is this, which again has exactly 3 notes on each string. Pattern number 3 then moves up again to here, which was the 3rd note of that first pattern that we just played. Pattern number 4 moves up to here. I'm just playing the G major scale going across the low E string, and that's where the starting point for each of these patterns is. So there's my starting point for each of these 7 patterns. So now I'm here. So here's the pattern here. Here's the next pattern. Here's the next pattern. Here's the next pattern. And then back to pattern number 1. And that's your 7 3-note per string pattern. If I wanted to locate the 7 patterns for, say, the key of A major, I would just said, okay, I'm going to put that on the note A because that's the scale root. There's the note A right there. This is my pattern number 1 now. This is my pattern number 2 now. This is my pattern number 3 now. And so on. The patterns are exactly the same. All I needed to know was, oh, what was the major scale root? A. Okay, put my index finger on the note A. There's my pattern number 1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It'll just keep looping until you run out of frets. Or if this is 1, it'll be 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in that direction until you run out of frets. So memorize the 7 3-note per string patterns just one single time for one single key, and then you can then play in all 12 keys using these same exact patterns. And the same thing works if you're playing in a minor key or something like that. You can always just kind of keep the numbering the same, and then just think as pattern number 6 being your home base. So if I was in the key of G major And then I was like, oh, what's the relative minor of G major again? Oh, that's right, the circle of fifths gives me that information. Hey, I happen to have that tattooed on my arm here. Cool. All right, so it's G, E minor. Okay, so that's the relative minor of G major. Okay, so I know that relative minor is the sixth note of a major scale. So G is 1, E minor is 6, okay? So if I know that I'm in the key of E minor and I want to kind of identify these patterns, I just have to know, okay, well, E minor, G major. G major is 1, E is 6, you know? So 6 is next to 7, 6 is after 5, 1 is before 2, 1 is after 7, and so forth, you know what I mean? So it always goes in the same order. It's always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you're playing in a minor key, just start out on pattern 6. If you want to call pattern 6 pattern number 1, cool, do that. It doesn't matter. They're just arbitrary numbers anyway, you know? All we just did is just map out the key scale for the key of G major or the key of E minor. That's it. There's actually an easier way to map out the diatonic scale than the previous two methods that I just showed you. Ultimately, we're just trying to map out the 7 notes of the key that we're playing in. That's all we're trying to do. So you can do that exact same thing, but you can do it using just 3 patterns if you want. So the reason that this third way doesn't really get talked about very much on the internet is it's actually kind of funny because there's so many misconceptions going around on the internet, and I'll talk a little bit more about these misconceptions in a bit, but the 2 big misconceptions are that people are constantly confusing the caged system with the 5 pentatonic positions. The 5 pentatonic positions are what we just looked at. You could take those 5 pentatonic positions and you can map out your fretboard via 5 box patterns. You can then take each of those 5 box patterns and you can add in your 2 remaining diatonic notes. At the end of the day, you just mapped out your key scale and you did it using 5 patterns. A lot of people think that that's what the cage system is for, and I guess it can get you there. I actually made a video not too long ago. It's called The Wrong Way to Use the Cage System, which is about that exact misconception, if you want to check that one out. But that's not the cage system, really. That's just the 5 pentatonic positions, all right? The other way, the second way that we looked at, the 7 3-note per string patterns, people are constantly confusing them and calling them modes. They call pattern number 1 the Ionian mode. They call pattern number 2 the Dorian mode. Pattern number 3 the Phrygian mode, the Lydian mode, Mixolydian mode, Aeolian mode, Locrian mode. That's not what modes are either. I have lots of videos on modes. I guess if I had to recommend one, I would say check out my one video called This Is Why You Don't Understand Modes. At least part 1 of that 3-part series. Check out that video. But these aren't modes either. These are just 7 patterns. It's just a 7 pattern approach to just, you know, mapping out your key scale. Everyone's constantly confusing the 5 pattern approach with the cage system. Everyone is constantly confusing the 7 pattern approach with modes. But there's nothing to confuse the 3 pattern approach with, so no one ever talks about it because there's no misconception surrounding the 3 pattern system. So we're going to do the exact same thing we did, but we're not going to do it in 5 patterns. We're not going to do it in 7 patterns. We're going to do it in 3 patterns. So we're going to map out this whole G major scale. We're going to map out this whole E minor scale, and we're going to do it in 3 patterns. Pattern number 1 is pentatonic position number 1. It's the home box. That's what I just called the home box, all right? We already found that. That's right up here. Here's your pentatonic notes, and then you add in your 2 remaining diatonic notes. So there's pentatonic position number 1. You also have pentatonic position number 1 down here. The second of the 3 patterns is pentatonic position number 4. I refer to this as the A string home box. All right, so here's your pentatonic position number 4 for this key. Here's pentatonic position number 4 up here as well. So that's 2 of the 3 patterns. Now, in order to complete the full fretboard, we're just going to add in a 3rd pattern. So you can locate this pattern by taking your index finger and putting it on the major scale root on the low E string, and then just applying the pattern. And hint, hint, this pattern is the same 3-note per string pattern as pattern number 1 in the 7 pattern approach. So first finger, major scale root, there's the note G. There's your pattern right there. This completes the fretboard. You're just trying to map out the 7 notes of the key you're playing, and that's all. That's it. All right? That's not modes. That's not the cage system. Those are the big misconceptions that you're going to read about 95% of the time, anytime you're on a Facebook group or a Reddit group or people are just passing information along and stuff like that. I've been doing it for years. I've been on the internet dealing with this stuff for 20 years. You know, if you don't believe me, just go on the internet and you'll see. Anyway, yeah, so we've mapped out the diatonic scale. Yeehaw! Let's now talk about the cage system. Alright, so I just got done telling you what the cage system is not, so now it's time to tell you what the cage system actually is. So the cage system is about chords. Up until now, we were only really concerned with the key of the music that we were playing in. These guitar systems, the 5 pentatonic positions, the 7/3 note per string pattern, and the simplified 3 pattern approach, all of that stuff was just about the mapping out the key scale. We weren't focused on individual chords. That's what the cage system is for. The cage system is about individual chords. The cage system allows you to play any chord on the entire neck of the guitar using one of 5 shapes. So in order to actually apply the cage system, in order to play any chord that you want anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar, you need to know 3 things. Number 1, you're going to need to know the notes on your low E string and on the A string. The second thing that you're going to need to know is you're going to need to memorize the 5 cage shapes. There's a C, an A, a G, an E, and a D shape. Memorize these 5 shapes. Don't just memorize them by shapes though, memorize them by the shape and by the numbers. You see that there's numbers inside of these shapes. There's 1s, 3s, and 5s. You have to memorize this. You have to only memorize this one time. You just memorize these 5 shapes, memorize these 5 shapes one time. You can play any chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar. Alright, so that's the second thing that you need to know. And then the third thing that you need to know is if the root note of the chord that you're trying to create resides on the A string, then you have a C shape and an A shape available to you. If the root note of the chord that you are trying to create resides on the low E string, then you have a G shape and an E shape available to you. If the root note of the chord that you are trying to create resides on the D string, then you have a D shape available to you. I know that sounds like a lot to take in, especially if you're new to this cage stuff, and especially if you've been led to believe that the cage system is a way of identifying scale patterns, which you're probably confusing for the 5 pentatonic positions. I'm just saying it's a big thing that people get confused about. I know this can sound like a lot to take in, but I'm telling you, these 3 things are the cage system in a nutshell. Memorize these 3 things. You have to do this one time. Memorize this one time, and then you can play any chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar. I'll just give you one quick example. Like, I want to play a B minor chord here, right? So where did my finger land? All right. So where's the nearest B? The nearest B is right here, 7th fret. I'm just looking for the nearest B on either the low E string, the A string, or the D string. So here's a B right there. There's also a B right up there, since I'm looking for B's on the low E, A, or D string. So there's my 2 potential places for which to build chords from. So knowing that if my root note location resides on the low E string, I have a G shape available and an E shape available, I could play a B major chord like this. So that's a B major chord in the G shape. And then knowing that a minor chord is just a major chord with a lowered third. So instead of having, I could just lower the third. So there's a B minor chord right there. Or if I were to take, say, here's 1, 3, 5. I'm playing right there. So just take the third and lower that by a half step. So here's a B minor chord right here. That's a B minor chord. You don't have to play the full chord all the way in full, all the way across 6 strings. You just have to play a 1, a flat 3, and a 5 together, and then you have yourself a minor chord. Or I could start at that same spot, the 7th fret of the low E string, and then I could say, okay, if my root note resides on the low E string, I have a G shape or I have an E shape available to me. So having an E shape available to me, I could put my index finger right there on the root note, and then I can play an E shape. So here's a B major chord. If I want to turn that into a minor chord, I just have to lower the third by 1/2 step. So here's a B minor chord. So I have a whole bunch of B minor chords just using those 2 shapes. I have this. I could play just the high 4 strings. I could play just the D, G, and B strings. That's a B minor chord. Coming back to this G shape, I could play this. That's a B minor chord. I could play these 3 notes together. This is a B minor chord. Alright, so I've been playing a bunch of different B minor chords, just, it's all coming from either the G shape or the E shape. Alright, and then also in this area, I also have the root note B right here, 9th fret of the D string. So anytime your root note resides on the D string, you have the D shape available to you. So I could always play a B major chord like this. You don't have to play all 4 strings. Here's a B major chord as well. But the objective is to play a B minor chord, so knowing where the third is, just lower the third. So here's a B minor chord. All right, so what I was doing right there is I was using a whole bunch of fretboard area, a whole bunch. And I was playing B major chords and I was playing B minor chords. So how can you use a B major chord and how can you use a B minor chord? People ask this question a lot. I mean, like, anytime a song has a B minor chord in it, just play a B minor chord. You don't always have to play the B minor chord that you were taught in the first week of guitar, you know? Play a B minor chord like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. There's a bunch of different ways to play a B minor chord. It's just 3 notes. You're just putting 3 notes together. The cage system, just the way that we were just looking at, the practical application of the cage system, allows me to play B major chords and B minor chords without even needing to know the notes of a B major chord or a B minor chord. Like, I didn't even have to know that. All I need to know is B. That's it. I need to know that one thing. It's like I'm trying to play a B type of chord, so I need to know B. And then I need to know where to find the note B on either this string, or this string. If I find the note B on this string, then I have a G shape or an E shape available to me. If I find the note B on this string, then I have a C shape or an A shape available. If I find the note B on this string, then I have a D shape available to me. Once I find the shape, and I've already memorized the shape by its numbers, by its 1s, its 3s, and its 5s, I can then take those numbers and I can manipulate them. So 1, 3, and a 5 is a major chord. A 1, a flat 3, otherwise known as a lowered third, otherwise known as a minor third. A 1, a flat 3, and a 5 is a minor chord. You can add notes to these cage shapes to make more fancy chords, 7th chords, extended chords. You can manipulate these chords in other ways to make diminished chords and augmented chords. You can do all kinds of stuff, but it all just starts with one of the 5 shapes. And we're just applying an arbitrary label to these shapes. We're just like, oh, that looks like a C chord that I've learned on my first week of guitar. We're going to call it the C shape. That's it. So just as I said, everything on the guitar is movable, which means that if you learn how to play in one single key, you can then play in all 12 keys. That's the benefit that we have on the guitar. The guitar allows us to cheat. The guitar allows us to bypass a whole bunch of general music theory, yet still accomplish actually playing the fundamentals without actually knowing the fundamentals, if that makes sense. So the cage system, the chord thing, the chord shapes, the layer 2, as I call it on zombie guitar, it's all movable in the exact same way that the scale patterns are. I refer to the scale patterns as layer 1. In order to apply the movability of chord changes, you need to think in terms of numbers as opposed to thinking in terms of actual chords. So for the key of G major, which is the same key signature as E minor, instead of saying, okay, we have a G major chord, an A minor chord, a B minor chord, a C major chord, a D major chord, an E minor chord, and an F sharp diminished chord, instead of saying that, we're just going to say 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, and 7 chord. We're just going to assign numbers to these chords, because you can then look at any key in the same manner. Like if you wanted to look at the key of C major, instead of saying C major, D minor, E minor, instead of saying the 7 chords by the actual chord names, you could just say 1 chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This now links the keys together. 1 chords are always going to work like 1 chords are always going to work like 1 chords. It doesn't matter which key you're playing in. 2 chords are always going to work like 2 chords. It doesn't matter which key you're playing in. So that is the first step. Start thinking about chord changes by numbers. So let's just take that example progression that I used in the demo in the beginning. It was a what? It was an E minor chord to a G major to a D major to an E minor to A minor to C major to E minor. So we're not going to call it that anymore. We're going to call it by its numbers. So this is a 6. This is a 1. This is a 5. This is a 6. This is a 2. This is a 4, and this is a 6. It doesn't matter if I play it using the cowboy chords. I could play it playing the bar chords. Any of these movable shapes will work. This is the big secret right here to applying the movability concept to chord changes. Thinking in terms of numbers will allow you to play in any of the 12 keys and keep up with the chord changes by thinking in terms of shapes as opposed to thinking in terms of actual notes or actual chords. So anytime, just start today. Anytime you play a chord progression, anytime you listen to a chord progression, anytime there's a chord progression, start getting into the habit of thinking of it in terms of numbers as opposed to actual chords, because that's the first step to making this work. So enough talk, let me show you how this actually works. So let's take the key of G major / E minor, which is the key we've been playing the whole time. Let's look at pentatonic position number 1. Here's our pentatonic position number 1 right here in between frets 12 and 15. We're going to add our 2 extra diatonic notes in here as well, so we have our full 7-note key scale. So this is your E natural minor scale in another octave, or your G major scale in another octave, and then you have the same stuff down here if you want. I'm just going to play up here just because it's it's right in the middle of the camera and it's nice. I like this area. So your 1 chord is always going to be found in the G shape. All right, so within pentatonic position number 1, your 1 chord is always found like this. Now you could play any combination of 1s, 3s, and 5s. Here's a G major chord. Here's a G major chord. Here's a G major chord. All right, so there's your 1 chord. Your 2 chord is always going to be found in this shape within pentatonic position number 1. Your 3 chord is always going to be found in this shape, which is like the C shape, made minor. So that's your 3 chord found there. Your 4 chord is always going to be found in this shape, which is the C shape. 5 chord is going to be found in the D shape. Your 6 chord is going to be found in the E shape, made minor. And we're not going to worry about the 7th chord. That's the diminished chord. We're just worried about the 3 major chords and 3 minor chords for the sake of this video. So you have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 chords within pentatonic position number 1. That allows you to play any chord progression in any key, at least in pentatonic position number 1. So what if the band says, hey, we're in the key of E flat, take a solo, and you're like, oh no, I never played in E flat before, but I can at least find my pentatonic position number 1. How do I do that? Well, it's E flat major. That's what the band said. They told me it was the key of E flat major. So major, I take my pinky, I put it on the note E flat on the E string. Oh, there's one. There's a note E flat right there. E flat is 1 less than E. If E is the 12th fret, E flat would be the 11th fret. So I just put my pinky right there. And there's my pentatonic position number 1. So even if I don't use the rest of the fretboard, I can still take a solo in the key of E flat major. I can just noodle around in this little scale pattern. I can stick to my 5 pentatonic notes, or I can add in the additional 2 diatonic notes. Now, as I'm listening to the chord progression, maybe I recognize that's a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. I've heard that chord progression in a million bazillion other songs. I recognize that chord progression. I know my 1 chord is in this shape. I know my 5 chord is in this shape. I know my 4 chord's in this shape. And the 6 chord's in this shape. So, knowing that I don't even have to play these shapes in full, I can just kind of just play like the 1 chord like this. The 5, the 6 chord, maybe I'll do that one in the full 6 string, and then the 4 chord like this. So I'm in the key of E flat, I'm playing a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. I might not even know the notes on any of these other strings. I don't know what actual chords I'm playing. I don't know any music theory. I just know this guitar theory stuff. This is what guitar theory allows us to do. Guitar theory allows us to cheat. It allows us to play in any key using shapes that we have memorized. It allows us to do all this without needing to know the notes of the fretboard, without needing to know the actual notes that make up each chord, without needing to know the actual notes that are in each scale. All right, so I think I'm going to wrap this video up here. This is all the arithmetic of music theory. After you really know the arithmetic, by all means, go and start to study the calculus. But a lot of people they start to study the calculus before they even understand the arithmetic. So I'm just trying to really drill home the arithmetic. All right, that's what I do. That's what this is. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time.